welcome to our channel, where everyday stories come to life with depth and emotion. Today, we invite you to witness a situation that may seem simple at first. Just a quiet farmer, a gentle bull, and a woman living next door. But beneath the surface lies a tense confrontation between calm resilience and an obsession with control. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover the unexpected twists of this powerful story. What would you do if, on a perfectly normal day, you discovered that the outdoor power outlet in your yard had suddenly become a free charging station for your neighbor? No permission, no thank you, and worse, when you bring it up, they glare at you like you're the unreasonable one. Sounds ridiculous? Well, that's exactly what I experienced with Karen, my special neighbor, the kind of person you never want to deal with twice in a lifetime. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, ideal really for someone who values privacy. Every morning, I have a simple routine: brew some coffee, sit on the porch, read a book, or just listen to the birds sing. It's my little piece of peace, undisturbed. At least it was, until the house next door went up for sale. A few weeks later, Karen showed up. She arrived with a shiny electric car, the click-clack of high heels echoing each morning, and a voice so loud on her phone that it sounded like she was broadcasting her own talk show. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, everyone has the right to live their own way. But things took a turn one late afternoon. I was taking the trash out when something odd caught my eye. A thick orange cable stretched across my lawn, running from my outdoor outlet, directly into Karen's garage. At first, I figured she was just borrowing it for a moment. Maybe her power was out. Maybe the garage was being renovated. I really tried to stay positive. I wanted to. But then it happened again, and again, day after day. No knock on the door, no note, no request. She acted as if my outlet was some kind of community property. I started asking myself, am I overreacting, or am I being taken advantage of? But when that month's electric bill skyrocketed without explanation, I knew it wasn't just in my head. And the worst part? When I finally knocked on her door to talk about it, she shrugged and said, "Oh, it's just a bit of electricity. No need to make a big deal out of it." At that moment, I realized this wasn't about a bit of electricity. This was blatant disrespect, and I had no intention of letting it slide. But I also wasn't going to scream or make a scene. I was going to do it my way, quietly, cleverly, and very intelligently. At first, Brutus was nothing more than a quiet detail in the peaceful landscape of the valley, a bull ambling through the grass, so far from the residential area that he was nearly invisible. But to Karen, things were never quite so simple. She began noticing what she called warning signs: a hoofprint near her tulip bed, a patch of weeds that looked slightly trampled, or a distant morning bellow she claimed was a threat to neighborhood security. Though there was no clear evidence, Karen insisted that Brutus was the source of chaos, in a community she believed should be a shining example of order. Not long after, Lucas received the first letter, not from any official authority, but from the Crescent Oaks Internal Oversight Committee, a group unofficially founded by Karen herself. In the letter, he was instructed to immediately contain his livestock, ensure no animals approach the community boundary, and comply with Section 7.3 of the Resident Handbook on Landscape Protection. Lucas quietly folded the letter, set it on the table, and went back to his farm work as if nothing had happened. He knew he had broken no laws. His land lay outside the community, and Brutus had never crossed the boundary. But Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. The next letters became increasingly aggressive, peppered with warnings about non-cooperative behavior and the risk of collective resident action. One day, Lucas caught her standing by the fence, taking pictures of Brutus like she was gathering evidence. When he approached her, Karen coolly explained she was monitoring the risk level of large animals near the community. Lucas's silence didn't deter her. If anything, it seemed to embolden her sense of authority and control. Then, one early morning, just before the sun broke over the cattle shed, Lucas noticed a red tape stretched across the fence line bordering the residential area. Attached to it was a printed notice in bold, capital letters: "Animal access prohibited, by order of the residents of Crescent Oaks." Lucas stood still, his hand instinctively tightening, not from fear, but from the unsettling realization that, for the first time in his life, His peace was being threatened by something he couldn't quite define, an invisible force of control tightening from the other side of the fence. His efforts to resolve the conflict through silence were no longer enough. The rift had taken a real shape, and Karen, with her clipboard in hand and fire in her eyes, had begun a battle she believed she would win, regardless of truth, reason, or boundaries. What seemed like a petty dispute filled with meaningless warnings and tense whispers across the fence was about to take a darker turn. Karen hadn't come to suggest. She came to command. And when her demands were ignored, she didn't go through more letters or community meetings. She showed up in person, cold and unapologetic. One weekend afternoon, while Lucas was filling a water tank behind the house, he heard the crunch of tires stopping just beyond the gravel path leading to his farm. Looking up, he saw Karen step out of a silver SUV, holding a small aluminum case. Sunlight glinted off her thin-rimmed glasses, casting sharp edges across her face. She didn't knock. She didn't greet him. She simply stood beyond the fence, scanning the fields like an airport security officer on patrol. "That bull," she said loudly, pointing to Brutus, who was dozing under a tree, "was near my garden yesterday. I have pictures. If you don't do something, I will." Before Lucas could respond, Karen unlatched the case, revealing a sleek black handgun, placed neatly beside a stack of documents organized like investigative files. She didn't raise the weapon, but her message was unmistakable. This wasn't just a threat. It was a calculated declaration of war. "This is for self-defense," she said, seeing the stunned look on Lucas's face. "And to show you how serious I am about Crescent Oaks' security." Lucas took a step closer, the warmth in his usual demeanor now replaced by a steady, cold gaze. His voice dropped low and deliberate. "You brought a weapon onto my property. You're threatening my livestock. I hope you understand. You've stepped far beyond the bounds of civil behavior." Karen let out a dry, humorless laugh, turned on her heel, and walked away without another word. But as her SUV rolled down the drive, a chilling stillness settled over the land, like a storm was brewing, not in the sky, but deep within the hearts of those who had drawn their lines. That night, Lucas didn't sleep. He sat by the old wooden table, staring at a hand-drawn map of the land passed down from his father. His eyes stayed fixed on the eastern boundary, where Karen had stood, where even the grass now seemed uneasy. He knew then, this conflict would not be silenced by patience alone. And if Karen intended to use pressure and fear to control him, he would answer with something far stronger, wisdom and the rule of law. Lucas wasn't someone who reacted on impulse. He was born and raised among wide, open fields, where people learn to wait, to observe, and to think before they act. In farming, a rushed decision can ruin an entire season. And in this standoff with Karen, he knew the same principle applied. But unlike tending crops, this time he needed more than patience. He needed evidence, clarity, and a strategy. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen over the hills, Lucas headed into town. At an electronics store near the post office, he purchased 3 waterproof security cameras and a cloud-based storage system. Back at home, he didn't mount the cameras in obvious places. Instead, he placed them carefully in strategic spots, one in the corner of the cattle shed where Brutus often rested, another aimed directly at the fence bordering the residential area, and the third hidden under the eaves, with a wide view of the eastern edge of his property. He also visited the local sheriff's office, not to file a report just yet, but to ask, "What happens if someone brings a gun onto my property without permission?" The officer took notes, then advised him to gather more evidence. Words alone, unless recorded or backed by a witness, won't hold up well in court. Lucas nodded, returned home, and began keeping a detailed log. Every encounter, every threat, every unusual thing that happened near the fence. He reached out to the family's old lawyer, Harold, a longtime friend who had retired but was always willing to help. After listening to everything, Harold leaned back and said calmly, "If she goes too far, we'll let the law pull her back." Meanwhile, Lucas told no one else. To the neighbors, he was still the same, tending to Brutus, mending fences, and offering a quiet nod to anyone passing by. But behind the scenes, a case was being built, one quiet step at a time. Then, almost as if fate decided to lend him a hand, it happened. On a Sunday afternoon, the camera near the fence captured Karen stepping onto Lucas's property, gun in hand, pointing it directly at Brutus, who stood calmly several meters away, unmoving and unthreatening. Lucas didn't watch the footage alone. He invited Harold over, opened his laptop, and scrolled through each frame. When the gun appeared in full view on the screen, Harold nodded once. "That's enough," he said. "Now it's time to bring this into the light." News didn't need a loudspeaker to travel. Just days after Lucas submitted the video to the police and filed an official complaint, whispers began to ripple through Crescent Oaks. No one knew exactly what was happening, but side glances at community meetings and hushed conversations along the walking paths all pointed to one person, Karen. Lucas wasn't seeking attention, but the wheels of justice had begun to turn. A uniformed officer arrived at the gates of the neighborhood, delivering an official summons for Karen to appear at the Seabrook Town Police Station to answer for trespassing and making threats with a weapon. What should have been a routine legal step caused a stir. No one in Crescent Oaks had ever been summoned for something like this. Karen, once proudly calling herself the gatekeeper of order, was now the center of an increasingly divided community. A week later, a community meeting was held at the Seabrook Town Center, right next to the historic Fort Ashbury, almost as if the past itself were silently witnessing a modern conflict. Lucas arrived on time, wearing his old brown hat, blending humbly into a crowd of neatly dressed residents. He said nothing, quietly taking a seat in the back. Karen entered soon after, her usual sharp gaze and defensive posture intact, but this time there was tension in her eyes. She no longer controlled the energy in the room. Presiding over the meeting, Mr. Sam Hendricks, a representative of the community board, stood and sighed before addressing the group. "Tonight, we're discussing a serious matter concerning safety, legal boundaries, and personal accountability." Then, the large screen behind him flickered to life, and the video began playing, unedited, uncut. Karen appeared on the screen in full clarity, stepping over the fence line, a gun clearly visible in her hand, her voice slicing through the silent room. "If you won't control the bull, I will." For 3 minutes, no one spoke. When the video ended, an elderly woman in the front row softly whispered, "Oh, dear God." And just like that, the room turned, not with admiration, but with shock and disappointment. Karen stood, preparing to defend herself, but there were no supportive murmurs this time, no applause, just a heavy silence. A young man, newly moved into the neighborhood, broke it with a cold, clear question. Where exactly do we live? In a model community, or in a place where anyone can wave a gun at a neighbor's animal? The local authorities issued their verdict soon after. Karen was formally reprimanded for making a weaponized threat, prohibited from approaching Lucas's property within 100 feet, and stripped of her authority to organize any unofficial meetings in Crescent Oaks. The next morning, Seabrook Valley greeted the sunlight as if no storm had ever passed through. Early rays poured over the weathered wooden roof of the cattle shed, where Brutus, the bull at the heart of it all, grazed peacefully by the old fence. He gave his massive head a gentle shake, seemingly unbothered by the chaos he had unintentionally been part of. For Brutus, the world was still sunshine, grass, and the quiet presence of the man who always stood by his side. As for Lucas, he sat as he always did on the porch, a mug of strong black coffee in hand, his eyes drifting toward the rising sun. But this time, his gaze no longer carried the weight of a man being pushed around. It carried the quiet stillness of someone who had weathered the storm. He didn't speak much about what had happened. He didn't gloat when people in town began to look at him differently, with respect in their eyes. The residents of Crescent Oaks began to change. Some, once quietly burdened by Karen's unspoken rules, now moved with a sense of relief, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. A few started stopping by to chat with Lucas as they passed his fence. Some even brought their kids to see Brutus, take pictures, and leave with smiles they never used to wear. Karen, however, was a different story. Since that fateful meeting, she was rarely seen. The flood of internal memos had dried up into a distant memory. Her house stayed shuttered, curtains drawn. Though she still lived in the neighborhood, the power she once held had vanished like morning mist under sunlight, leaving only silence and a void of authority that no one seemed eager to fill. A month later, Lucas received a small envelope, no name, no return address. Inside was a short, handwritten note in slanted cursive. "I went too far. I'm sorry." No signature, but he knew who it was from. Lucas didn't hold grudges. He tucked the letter into an old drawer with the rest of his important papers, not because he had fully forgiven, but because he understood something deeper. Everyone makes mistakes, and anyone can choose to change. And so, the modest farm beside the historic Fort Ashbury stood as it always had, quiet, unassuming, but unwavering. And there, a steady farmer and his gentle bull had proven something simple yet powerful. Calm, truth, and quiet resolve can overcome any attempt at control, even when it comes from the other side of the fence. The story of Lucas, the calm, grounded farmer, and Karen, a resident with an overwhelming need for control, is not merely a dispute over land or a gentle bull. Beneath the surface lies a much deeper lesson about freedom, personal boundaries, and how we coexist in modern communities. In today's world, where we live closer to one another than ever, in gated neighborhoods, suburban complexes, and shared spaces, the need for mutual respect and understanding the limits of personal authority has never been more essential. Lucas did not respond to threats with anger. He didn't shout, retaliate, or use force to protect what was his. Instead, he met the situation with calm, wisdom, and quiet determination. In doing so, he not only defended his land and the animal he loved, but also earned the respect of an entire community. This story reminds us, silence is not always weakness. Sometimes, it is strength waiting for the right moment to act. On the other hand, Karen's actions serve as a cautionary tale. Excessive control, even if well-intentioned, can quickly become overreach and cause harm. When we believe we are always right and try to impose that on others, we cross the boundaries that hold peace together. Karen's unsigned letter of apology, delivered quietly after everything unfolded, is a powerful reminder that anyone can change, if they are brave enough to recognize their wrongs. We live in a society governed by laws, but we also need compassion and humanity. Laws can protect us from injustice, but it is kindness and understanding that allow us to truly live well with one another. From this story, each of us can ask ourselves, am I living like Karen, insisting everything go my way? Or like Lucas, quiet, steady, and choosing the right moment to speak up? In an age where social media can turn small sparks into wildfires in seconds, perhaps what we need most is the ability to pause, observe, gather truth, and respond with purpose. That's not just how we protect ourselves, it's how we preserve the respect and dignity that every community needs to thrive. If you felt angry watching someone like Karen pull out a gun to threaten an innocent animal, if you connected with Lucas, the man who chose silence and calm, yet was never weak, if you believe that everyone has the right to live peacefully on their own land, without fear or the imposition of someone's personal rules, then hit like to stand up for kindness. Subscribe to our channel to join us in spreading real, inspiring stories like this one, and don't forget to share this video with your friends, because somewhere out there someone might be dealing with a Karen no one dares to confront. This isn't just a story about a bull and a neighbor, it's a lesson in patience, justice, and the limits of control. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.